Hello, I'm Reggie York, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. This is a presentation on the nature of grants as funding for nonprofit organizations. It's part of a course of study on grant writing. At the end of this review, you should be able to identify the nature of the nonprofit agency and how much it depends on grants. For example, what kind of organization is nonprofit? Does it depend totally on grants or what? Identify the nature of grants as a funding source for nonprofits and where they come from. Who provides grants? Identify who typically qualifies for a grant. Can Reggie York, that's me, apply as an individual for a grant? Well, actually, that's not true, but this is the kind of thing we'll talk about in this presentation. Also, we will talk about the parts of the typical grant proposal, like the need statement, the program statement, and so forth. Next, I want to talk a little bit about what is a nonprofit agency, because that is the focus of this presentation. There are really three basic auspices for organizations that might provide human services: governmental, profit, and nonprofit. I think everybody knows what a governmental agency is. You probably know what a profit-making one is. Maybe you don't know as much about a nonprofit. So I'm going to give you a question here. Which of these is a nonprofit? The Pender County Health Department, the United Way of Greater Richmond and Petersburg, or General Motors Corporation? Well, I hope you selected the middle one, the United Way of Greater Richmond and Petersburg. That is a nonprofit organization. It's obvious, I think, that the first one is a governmental agency. It should be obvious that the last one is a profit-making organization. Now let's talk a little bit about the nature of the nonprofit organizations. They are normally incorporated in the state in which they exist. It's not a federal thing, it's a state thing. A nonprofit organization cannot have a profit. In other words, it cannot have surplus income that's distributed to its members like a profit corporation. A nonprofit can have more income than expenses in a given year, but it can't use that as a profit. It must use that surplus for services or special agency needs and so forth. It cannot distribute it as a bonus to the board members or stock options or things like a profit-making corporation can do. Nonprofits are distinguished from profit corporations not by structure but by purpose. The nonprofit organization has a public purpose such as charity, education, community recreation, and so forth. They are serving the public. That's the nature of the nonprofit organization. Okay, this is about grant writing, so let's pose the question, what is a grant? Is a grant a specific proposal for a program of services that address a recognized need, or a source of general support for the agency? Some funding source says, we will support your agency, we think you're doing good, here's some money to do with as you please to provide support, so that we will provide support for you. I hope you see that it is number A, item A. It's for a specific program of services, not for general support of an agency. So you'll focus on the program, services, and need, not the fact that the agency needs money, and it's a good agency. What is a typical time limit for grants? Do grant funding sources normally provide the agency with long-term funding or short-term limited time funding? Well, the answer is the second one, limited. Typically a grant is 1 year, maybe 2 years, sometimes even 3, but it's not unusual for a grant to be for only 1 year period of time. If you're looking for a funding source for 10 years or 20 years or indefinite, then a grant is not normally the way to go for that. Who provides grant funding? Foundations are one source of funding for grants. This would include like the Ford Foundation, Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, and lots of other foundations throughout the United States. There's a foundation directory, by the way, that you have to subscribe to, but it provides information on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of foundations throughout the United States. Foundations are typically funded by an initial large donation and are governed by a board that decides how the funds will be allocated in the form of grants. They are themselves nonprofit organizations. Who else provides grants? Well, government agencies provide grants. This can be at the federal, state, or local level. Federal grants tend to be larger but more complicated than other grant funding sources. And if you're looking for a program kind of support, be wary. Don't go to the federal list and get one of those grants that's got the letter R. That's a research grant. That's designed for research, not for programs. Some profit corporations provide grants. These tend to be targeted to a particular population and tend not to be terribly big. One of the questions is who qualifies for grants from foundations? They typically prefer the nonprofit agency for grant allocations. Governmental agencies may be eligible, but foundations do not usually look favorably on this particular entity because they don't want to do the work of the government. The government can collect taxes, so they have a great source of potential income. Foundations want to do something different. Profit agencies are not usually eligible for grants from foundations. It's also true that individuals are not usually eligible. I cannot apply for a grant from the Ford Foundation just as an individual, no matter what kind of good stuff I want to do with the money. I would normally not be considered eligible. In regard to all kinds of funding sources, by the way, be very careful when you're looking for information to be sure about eligibility status, because foundations tend to have targeted missions that may have targeted populations that they provide funds for. So if you don't qualify on those bases, you're not going to get anywhere with that particular funding source. Grants from the government, individuals are not normally eligible, with the exception perhaps of some kind of special scholarship kinds of things that the government sometimes do, but not for program kinds of grants that we're talking about in this particular presentation. In some situations, levels of government are more favored by governmental grants. In some situations, nonprofit agencies are more favored. Profit agencies are sometimes eligible but are not likely to be as competitive. So, as you can see from several things we've said so far, the nonprofit organization is a very competitive kind of organization for grants in general. How much do nonprofits depend on grants for funding? Does the typical nonprofit rely mostly on grants for financial survival, or just a portion of their budget? Are there other sources of financial support? In answer to the first question, nonprofit agencies rely to a notable degree upon grants, but they rely upon other sources of funding greater than grants. Grants usually provide less than half of the funding for nonprofit organizations. Other sources of financial support include things like service fees from clients that get their services, endowments from wealthy people who decide to leave a lot of money to that particular organization. They do fundraising activities and might even have general support from certain kinds of organizations like the Presbyterian Counseling Center might get regular support from Presbyterian churches throughout their region, for example. Let's talk briefly about the parts of the grant proposal. There are a number of parts, but what the grant's funding source wants you to do will depend from one funding source to another. So I'm going to talk only about the kinds of things that you normally have to include in one way or another in a grant proposal. But each source will tell you exactly what they want you to do and what order they want you to do it. The cover page is usually something you need to do. This contains the title of the proposal, name and address of the applying organization, a key contact person with information about that contact person. Just the cover page is a separate thing. The very first thing, of course, that you're going to have, that the person is going to see when they see your grant proposal. Typically, the second thing they will see is your executive summary. This summarizes your proposal in one page. Concise, very well written, if it's competitive, and it really sums up clearly what the grant proposal is all about. The need statement, what need is being addressed. This should focus on human need rather than agency needs. Funding sources want to help depressed people, they want to help abused children, and so forth, or prevent delinquency. They don't want to help your agency survive. That's not their interest. Goals and objectives are typically one part of what you put into a grant proposal. What are you going to accomplish? Are you going to help high-risk youth graduate from high school, reduce delinquency, improve self-esteem, improve employment skills, or what? Parts of the grant proposal, let's look at one more thing here. The next thing I want to talk about is the program. What will you be doing? What services or activities will be a part of it? Will you be doing tutoring for at-risk youth, therapy for those depressed, support group for abused spouses? This is something you need to write carefully enough that the reader of your proposal will know what that looks like if they were to see it in action. The organizational statement. The funding source wants to know who is applying for the grant, what is their mission, track record, etc. They want to know if the organization is capable of delivering the goods. So having a good track record is very good. Being a brand new organization is not very good. Does not make you competitive. The evaluation plan is another part of the grant proposal. How will services be evaluated to determine if the goals and objectives were achieved? Will you measure gain in self-esteem, or repeat offenses of delinquency, or improvement in marital satisfaction? You notice I didn't say anything about how much service was delivered. I'm talking about what the service is accomplished. The budget and explanations are part of what you typically have. The line item budget is normally required. This means you specify how much money is going to be spent for personnel, for equipment, and various things of that nature. Often the funding source will have special forms or a special format for that. Also, some items on the budget may need to be explained in your narrative statement in your grant proposal. You'll also notice there'll be attachments sometimes. You might be asked to provide letters of support from other agencies. You might be asked to provide your organizational structure, information about governance, and so forth. There are any number of things that funding sources might want you to attach to their proposal. Okay, I've covered everything. Let me just quickly summarize. Nonprofit agencies rely on grants for a significant part of their budget, but not the majority. Nonprofit agencies qualify for grants more than other types of agencies that provide human services. Grants are time-limited funds for programs. Grant proposals typically have an executive summary, a need statement, a program description, an agency description, and a budget. This is the end of the presentation. I hope this was helpful.